Good morning, everyone. This is a special planning committee meeting. I'm getting some feedback here, so I hope we're okay. Technical, first time I've run something like this, so please be kind to me because I'm sure I'm going to need some help on the inside here. But it is a special planning committee meeting and an official plan review working committee meeting, Thursday, July 9th here in the township. So I have a few things I have to read here in the beginning to allow us to do this electronic meeting following all of the rules that the province has put in place. So a special meeting of the Planning and Official Plan Review Working Committee will be held July 9th, 2020 at 10 a.m. electronically in the Council Chambers, Municipal Offices, Port Carling, Ontario, for the purposes of an official plan review policy directions workshop. As a result of the order in council issued by the province of Ontario declaring an emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the order requirements for social distancing, the Special Planning Committee and Official Plan Review Working Committee meeting will be held electronically from the Council Chambers, Municipal Office, Port Carling, Ontario, in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001. This provides for electronic participation where an emergency has been declared to exist in all or part of the municipality under Section 4 or 7.01 of the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. As part of the township's response to stop the spread of COVID-19, the municipal office remains closed to the public until further notice. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at www.muskokalakes.ca. If for any chance this webcast fails, the meeting will be recorded and the meeting is being recorded and it'll be posted on our website, muskokalakes.civicweb.net/portal/. So public participation in this electronic meeting may occur through viewing the webcast and or providing comment regarding specific agenda items at the following email address. Please ensure that the specific agenda item is identified in the subject line of your email, planning@muskokalakes.ca. I think that's it for that part of it. So I'm calling the meeting to order at 10:08 a.m. All right, so I should have done that before I read all that to you, but I'm not going to reread what I just did. So I need to verbally confirm the members and also the steering committee and the planning committee are present. So when I call your name, please unmute yourself and identify that you're here. Well, I'm here. So Frank Jaglowitz.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards. Okay, can we take a hand? Okay. Oh, okay, you can wave your hand and that'll be good enough. Councillor Hayes.
All right, I am here.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Mazan.
I'm here.
Councillor Nishikawa.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts. Okay, we can't hear you, Councillor Roberts. Can you wave your hand?
Wonder why. Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zavitz.
Present.
Thank you. And Mayor Hardy.
As long as my video keeps moving, I'm here.
Okay, great. And in terms of the OP Review Steering Committee, Patricia Arney. Thank you. I see that wave. Okay. Bob Clark. Thanks, Bob. You see that wave? Liz Mundell.
Liz Lundell, present.
Thank you. David Scolati.
Right here.
Thank you. Great. Lori Thompson. She has actually sent her regrets. She had an emergency come up, so she won't be able to be here today, but she will be with us tomorrow. Do I need to reconfirm the councillors on this committee? Good. Okay. All right, so officially we have confirmed those present, and verbally I will confirm that Lori Thompson is absent for this meeting. Now I would like to confirm RCAO, Mr. Hammond, you are here.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
Thank you. And our clerk, Ms. Mortimer. And Mr. Pink, Director of Development Services and Environmental Sustainability. We have to shorten that at some point. Okay.
I agree, and I'm here.
Okay, thanks. And I see Mr. Allen, our Manager of Planning, is also here.
Present.
Thank you. Summer Valentine, the Director of Planning for the district.
Present. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I believe that is who I needed to confirm. I would also like to acknowledge that Jim Dyment, who is one of our consultants for Meridian Planning, is with us this morning.
Good morning, all.
Thank you. And Nick McDonald, who is also with Meridian Planning.
Good morning, all.
Thank you. Okay, so public input had been invited for this agenda from planning@muskokalakes.ca. My understanding is that we got general comments, not, well, I'm going to let Mr. Pink take that. Thank you.
Thank you. We just received, just about 13 minutes ago, the first general comments from the community on today's meeting. Happy to forward that email to the members and the consulting team. Just very brief comments on Policy Direction 1, causation studies, rural contractor yards, aggregate, and pedestrians. I can reference those when we dive into those discussions. Apologize, that's correct, sorry. I know everyone was circulated, that's why it wasn't referenced, but we have received comments from the Friends of Muskoka as well. And happy to reference those as we go through the discussions if committee members wish. But I do believe you all received and were copied on those emails.
I think that the Muskoka Lakes Association also.
I would thank you for mentioning that. I saw in the Friends of Muskoka submission that the Muskoka Lakes Association submitted comments. I must not have been copied on that in where it's forwarded. So I do not have a copy of the Muskoka Lakes Association.
We will get that to you.
Barb, if I can just make a quick comment or question. Everyone's getting some feedback. When someone inside the council chamber speaks, you have to mute your speaker or whoever speaker's on. Only one speaker can be on, on their computer. Otherwise, we get feedback. David's voice is carrying through your microphone, coming back out your speaker, back to his microphone.
Okay, I thought I had my speaker off, so I'll be on that more. Are you good now, though? There's no feedback now? Okay, I will check in on that, and please let me know if it happens again. Okay, in terms of motions, the motions have been pre-populated with random movers and seconders to expedite the meeting, and voting, members shall physically raise their hand until the chair has confirmed the vote. If the vote is unclear, a verbal vote shall be recorded by the clerk. This is not considered a recorded vote. Okay, so I'm going to acknowledge of a supplementary agenda. We do not have one today. So, and then the next thing I need to ask is disclosure of pecuniary interest. Would anybody like to disclose that? Okay, I believe, Madam Clerk, are you good with that? No hands. Okay, so we can move on from there. So I believe we move on to our invited delegations, and Mr. Pink is going to do an introduction from here, but I just wanted to because I've had some questions coming into today, I'd just like to confirm that for this review, we are not looking at the resort village of Manette or commercial resorts. They were pulled out of this review when we did the proposal for it. They are being handled separately. At the moment, we have a Manette Working Committee, and OPA for that part is coming back to council by the end of August. And then the process will start there for the draft OPA, et cetera. And in terms of commercial resorts, at the moment, it is planned for 2001 to work with the district on that, as we are working with them through our resort village of Manette. So I just wanted to explain why they aren't part of this, because I'd had a lot of questions about that. So I think the other thing, Mr. Pink will take us through the introduction. So I'm going to turn off my speaker. Please let me know if you're getting feedback. Thank you, Mr. Pink.
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman, and thank you everyone for attending this important workshop. You may recall it was originally scheduled, I believe it was on April 3rd, and it tended to be held at the Port Carling Community Center. And I think we all know what's happened since then and why we're now conducting this over Zoom, which will certainly pose some interesting challenges, but I hope we can work through today and tomorrow and make some progress, and appreciate everyone's patience as we live in this new meeting environment. So just very quickly, I'll just touch on the general process of the official plan review and where we are now before turning it over to the consulting team to provide a little bit of background and then start working through the policy directions. But obviously we're here today as part of the Township of Muskoka Lakes official plan review. Last summer, we did hold what's called a Section 26 public meeting. It's a sort of a public meeting to kickstart an official plan. We received comments from the public on some of the direction and their desires and wishes that we had with our new official plan. We also held a community visioning workshop at the Milford Bay Community Center. It was well attended and received a lot of good public feedback and produced a summary document from that process. Over the winter months, the consulting team worked on a series of discussion papers. That was part of phase 2. Those discussion papers were discussed a number of times by both the official plan review working committee and the planning committee, and were received, I believe it was earlier this year. We're now currently in phase 3, which is the policy direction phase. What we currently, the plan was before coronavirus hit, was after this workshop, was to reach out with some public engagement on these policy directions before returning back to the working committee and planning committee with the outcomes of that public engagement, before finalizing the policy directions and finally directing the consulting team to start the first draft of a new official plan. That new official plan policies would then obviously have statutory open houses and public meetings and further engagement and public consultation meant to be later this year. So perhaps when we wrap up tomorrow's meeting, we can have a brief discussion. Obviously, with the new environment we're all working under, the original public engagement strategy for this phase of the work plan consisted of an open house, some pop-up events, as well as social media and an online presence. Obviously, we're going to be unable to fulfill those due to the restrictions on gatherings, etc. So perhaps a brief discussion when we conclude tomorrow's meeting as to what committee members would like to see that replaced with. Obviously, a more of an online presence, but we could also discuss whether an online public meeting is to be held, etc. So the hope again today, you've all received the workbook and the policy directions some time ago. Hopefully we can work through those, see if any of them need any changes, see if any need to be deleted, see if any need to be added, and hopefully agree on a general direction so that we can begin some public engagement this summer on those policy directions in the next phase of our work plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick McDonald, the lead consultant, to go over today's meeting.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick McDonald. I'm here as well with Jim Dyment, and we will both be discussing the policy directions with you today. Also on our team are experts in public consultation, that's Lura Consulting, and we've been in touch with them to get their feedback and thoughts on an approach to consultation over the balance of the summer and early fall. And I look forward to having a conversation with this group tomorrow at the conclusion of our meeting to discuss next steps and what may or may not make sense in terms of going out to the public. I think we'll also have a better handle by the end of tomorrow on exactly what the next steps are, because there is a lot to discuss over the next couple of days, and we may go in a few different directions as a consequence. We're looking for your valuable input through this process. You are all collectively an incredible resource that we will be relying upon to help us prepare an official plan that will guide the township for the next 20 to 25 years. And in that vein, we have prepared a number of policy directions that you've had for quite some time now as a result of the COVID-19 situation that are essentially intended to help shape the writing of policy later in the process. The policy directions themselves are not policies. They may make their way in some form into the official plan in perhaps the goals or objectives or vision statement, but they aren't policies per se. Really, they're intended to establish a path forward in terms of the type of policy direction and policy approach that we could consider when we actually get down to writing policy. We want to make sure we get the policy directions right. That's what the purpose of this meeting is. And as David indicated, we're open to any and all suggestions on how the policy directions could be worded, whether they are required or not, or whether additional policy directions should be added. Purpose of today is also not to reach consensus. We realize and recognize that there are a variety of opinions out there. We appreciate the variety. That's what makes our country great. But at the end of the day, it may be difficult and elusive to reach consensus on some or all of the policy directions. Rather, my focus today, our focus today, is really to have a fulsome discussion on each of them. Make sure everyone who has an interest in a policy direction has an opportunity to provide their input so that we can consider it, and hopefully agree at the end that what we have come up with, either as is or as modified through these discussions, is an appropriate first step to getting some public consultation occurring and to get some feedback from the public on. I'd like to stress that through the process of today and tomorrow, and through the consultation process, and even afterwards, there will always be an opportunity to reconsider what we've talked about today and to further consider whatever we've talked about today when we get to policy. We're really on the ground floor, probably below the ground floor of the basement right now, moving up up the building, so to speak, and we're trying to create that platform on which we can go out and talk to the public and have further discussions on policy. In terms of where the policy directions came from, they came from us, obviously. We did try to synthesize some of the work we completed in the background report to come up with the policy directions. We recognize through some of the comments that have been submitted prior to today's meeting that there is and may be a desire to discuss some of the other elements and ideas that we have identified and canvassed in our discussion paper. We're very open to doing that. I would suggest we hold off on discussing other items until we've gone through the policy directions as a focus, but we're certainly very open to having those conversations. And certainly by the end of tomorrow, I think we'll have a good handle and understanding of where we are and whether there is a desire to have further discussions. And we are very open to doing that. which obviously means another meeting at some point in the future. But we want to make sure that there is the most fulsome of discussions on the directions that we're taking going forward. It's realized we've got detailed comments already from, and I'm just going through my screen here. We've got Councillor Gord Roberts, Barb Bridgeman, Donelda Hayes. We've also had comments from Peter Kelly, Pat Arney, Patricia Arney, sorry, David Scolati, Lori Thompson, and the Friends of Muskoka. As David indicated, we haven't seen the comments from the MLA, and we look forward to seeing those. If I missed someone, I apologize. We've been going through our emails over the last 3 months to make sure we've got all comments. I've printed everything that's been submitted. I'm still kind of old school, and I've read through everything that has been submitted. So I'm very appreciative of the time that folks have spent on this. I noticed Councillor Jagowitz has his hand up. I understand you also provided comments as well, and we did receive those. Thank you very much.
Councillor Jagowitz, could I jump in for a second because I missed a procedural step? I apologize, everybody, but before we can continue, we have to actually lift the normal rules of procedure so we can have this. I am sorry. I won't do this again tomorrow. So I need to read a motion moved by Councillor Jagowitz, seconded by Councillor Nishikawa. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 2.3.2 of the Township's Procedural Bylaw 2019-079, the rules of procedure are hereby suspended for the duration of the official plan review policy directions workshop, and that they be reinstated at the conclusion of the workshop. Any discussion? Could I have a vote, please? Hands in favor? Madam Clerk, are you? Well, do we want everybody to vote? Is that part of the deal? Okay, everybody needs to vote because we're officially all part of the of this meeting. There's Patricia. She's come back in. Carried? Okay. I apologize again, but thank you very much. Carry on, Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate my correspondence being recognized. What I was just asking, a procedural thing, if we want to speak, do you prefer we use the blue hand or put our hand up to the screen, or both? Just to make it simple. Oh.
Okay, so if
Sorry,
we could do the blue
did you
hand.
hear me? Was I unmuted or did you not hear me?
If you could use your blue hand, please, everybody, because not everybody's face is on the screen. It's easier for us to keep track of that here. So, and thank you for that question. Okay, so Mr. McDonald, would you like to carry on with this? I believe we're going to get into each of these sections. Could I ask, maybe before interrupting anything else, when we finish one section, could we just ask, I believe it'll be Mr. Dyment, to just sort of review for us what we all heard and what you're going forward with? It would be helpful for me and probably the public who are listening too. Thank you.
Yes, we can certainly do that. And I was just going to speak for a moment on the format of today as I see it in any event. And as mentioned, we are looking for your valued perspectives. We anticipate there'll be a fulsome discussion on many of the policy directions and maybe less of a fulsome discussion on others where there is lots of agreement. We're certainly hoping that is the case. In terms of how we see the meeting running, there are, I believe, 26 policy directions. We didn't know how long it would take to go through them. That's why we've got 2 sessions set up today and tomorrow. If we don't need all the time, that's great. If we need more time, that's fine as well. We'll have to manage that and figure that out. So in terms of how we want to run this session today, Jim or I would take the lead at the outset of a discussion on each policy direction to provide a little bit of background on where the policy direction comes from, what factors were considered in identifying and crafting the policy direction, and more importantly, what the implications of the policy direction are on the carrying out of planning in the future in the township. To a very large extent, the policy directions are crafted in such a way that it allows for some choice in how they're implemented. Some of them are quite simple. For example, we talk about a community planning permit system. While we could debate the merits of having one or not, the policy direction is very simple. Should we set up a policy framework to consider it later? So that's pretty straightforward. But some of the other ones are quite meaty, like lake system health. Should we go beyond the District of Muskoka's policy framework in their OP? And if so, what does that look like? So clearly there are some choices there that we can consider. So the thinking is that Jim or I would go through each of them, and then we turn it back to you, Councillor Bridgeman, to then facilitate a discussion and comments from anyone who wishes to speak. We would provide our input as required, answer questions of clarification, provide our thoughts, but really the focus of today is to get all of your comments collectively. We're thinking at this point that we would go for 2 hours and end around 12, take maybe a 10-minute break, and then come back and have an open discussion on any items that anyone wishes to talk about, so that everyone can feel that their voices were heard through this process. What we find in these kinds of meetings is that by the time we get to policy direction number 8, for example, someone has had another thought on policy direction number 2, and they wish to share that with us. So we want to make sure that there is enough time at the end of each of these sessions to have that discussion. And then tomorrow at the end of the session, we'll do the same thing again, but we'll also talk about next steps in terms of additional sessions if required, and also the public consultation approach that we have been thinking about. And we have reached out to Lura Consulting, as mentioned, and they've given us a few ideas that we want to talk to them a little bit more about. We do propose a hard finish today at 1 p.m. Everyone leads busy lives, and we really appreciate the 3 hours you've given us today. We are proposing a hard finish at 1 so that there's some structure to what we're doing today. With that being said, Councillor Bridgeman, that's really all I wanted to say at the outset. The first policy direction we are dealing with is lake system health. And unless there are any questions or comments at this point, I would like to hand it over to Jim Dyment to take us through a discussion on that particular issue, and then hand it back to you, Councillor Bridgeman, for a discussion of the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. That sounds great. I do have Councillor Roberts' hand. Looks like it's up, so I will take that question now, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Dyment.
Okay, just to go back.
Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. To go back to the procedure to raise your hand if you have something to say. I believe, David, you had a question when that was brought up. Am I correct?
Yeah, I just didn't see where my blue hand was.
Okay, that's all I had. You know now, right?
No, I don't. No. Where is the blue hand? Where is the blue hand?
Good point. And some of us have been on so many Zoom meetings now, it's like second nature. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see, I think it's participants. Is that not where we find it? Under participants?
See that? Yeah.
Okay, and then at the bottom, it says raise hand. Go right to the bottom of that screen, of that little screen.
I've got invite, more me, and raise hand. You are right. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So if no, or yeah, I mean, you can do this too. So our clerk is saying that will work too. So that's fine. So, all right, well, I think we're ready for Mr. Dyment then. Oh, does Liz have a, sorry, Liz, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify that I also sent in feedback via our Director of Development. And I hope those comments were received on Tuesday. And the Muskoka Lakes Association, of which I'm now on the board, also submitted some comments, although not correctly through Mr. Pink, but we'll get that to him.
Okay, thank you. So now, Mr. McDonald, do you want to respond to that, or are we moving on to Mr. Dyment? I'll let you two decide that.
Yes, sorry, I should have mentioned you were on my list, but I just missed you. So yes, we did receive your comments and we did review them ahead of today's meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Dyment.
Thank you. I'll first forewarn you that I'm on beautiful Skeleton Lake with a internet speed of below 1 megabyte per second most of the time. So I have not turned my video on, and I hope that you can all hear me clearly. The first section that we're going to talk about is lake system health, and our policy direction includes two fundamental policies. First, to implement the Muskoka District Official Plan by mirroring the lake health policies in that plan. Second deals with causation studies. By very quick ground, I'll say that what we're doing in Muskoka last 20 times, and those policies filtered down to the Muskoka Lakes Official Plan. The district policies have been simplified considerably, essentially recommending that where development occurs, that best management practices be implemented, and those include things like increased building, those things in the development process, and that would then apply enables municipalities to be more specific. And in this case, having read the feedback from what we've got so far, it seems pretty clear to me that that level of specific policies appears to be desirable. And so we can spell out best management practices, recommend the use of a holding zone for waterfront areas on those lakes where it be required, and the holding provision.
Excuse me, Mr. Dyment, could I interrupt you? You are cutting out so much that I am afraid that I am not getting what you're saying, and I don't know if any of the other councillors are having the same issue. Nobody's understanding this? Okay, I'm not sure how we deal with this technical issue unless Mr. Dyment, I don't know, Mr. McDonald, can you fill in if we're having real problems here on a technical end?
Yes, I can do that. Jim and I have spoken about this particular policy direction ahead of time. So yes, I could lead that discussion, and if Jim is able to assist, that's great. So as Jim was indicating, the district went through a specific process at the same time as the official plan review, looking at the lake system health policy framework. And included within the district's plan is a new and updated policy framework that deals with lake system health in a much different way than it did in the past. To a very large extent, the policy framework is based on the precautionary approach, essentially trying to ensure that we make good decisions in advance before finding problems are occurring. And I'm just looking at the district's plan really quickly. I know many of you are familiar with it, but the district's plan contains a very extensive policy framework that applies to all lakes within the district. There is a reliance being placed on the district taking a lead in the preparation of causation studies down the road as required. There are a number of policies that deal with the creation of new lots and development on vacant lots and redevelopment of lots as well. In particular, there is a requirement for 75% of the lineal shoreline frontage to be maintained in vegetation. Our understanding is that the township is exceeding that significantly through their current planning process. Essentially, every redevelopment and vacant lot and new lot goes through site plan control, and a significant amount of effort is already spent by the township on trying to achieve many of the policies that are already within the district's official plan. There is a requirement for a 30-meter setback for leaching beds, and then a 20-meter setback for all other structures, obviously excluding boathouses and docks. There is some pretty clear direction in the district's plan on the use of site plan control within waterfront areas, something the township already does. And also instead, municipalities could avail themselves of a community planning permit system, which is another policy direction we'll talk about later. But either way, there is clear direction to the area municipalities to ensure that every effort is made to minimize the environmental impact of development in the waterfront area. There are a series of policies on causation studies, and they apply to water bodies that are identified on Schedule E2 to the district's plan. There are 6 water bodies and parts of water bodies in Muskoka Lake that are on that schedule. They include Ada Lake, Brandy Lake, 3 Mile Lake, Bruce Lake, Stewart Lake, 3 Mile Lakes I just mentioned, and actually 6 in total. 3 have been identified as having phosphorus issues, and the other 3 have been identified as being where blue-green algae has been identified or determined to be found. Essentially, causation studies are required on these lakes, and they are to be initiated and done by the district when time and resources are available. Along with the policies on causation studies, there are enhanced protection policies that apply only to those lakes, and they require higher forms of sewage disposal and a greater review of the environmental impacts of development on those lakes. One of the considerations that we could take a look at as part of this process is to determine whether these enhanced protection policies in the district plan should be applied to not only the lakes that are identified as needing causation studies, but other lakes. That's a possible way of enhancing the policy framework. There are fairly detailed policies on development of vacant lots and redevelopment of existing lots. And David might jump in on this at some point, but our understanding is, again, that the township is very proactive currently through the site plan approval process in terms of maximizing vegetation retention, minimizing and even eliminating amenity areas close to the waterfront area through applications and so on. So to a very large extent, we think the township is moving in that direction in any event. However, we do admit that there should be clearer policies in the official plan that provide direction on that going forward. And as may come up in conversation today, there is also a need for enhanced monitoring and enforcement. Obviously, that's a significant issue that's being raised by a number of people. So the way the policy direction reads now is that we mirror the policies in the district's plan, and that we place a holding zone around the lakes that require causation studies to prevent development and redevelopment. That's what it says at this point. As Jim indicated before we broke up, there is a desire to go beyond that, and we're certainly interested in hearing what that means. Does that mean we should be striving for greater vegetation protection on properties? Should we be striving for greater setbacks, for example, than established by the district's official plan? We're certainly open to discussing any of those items. So that's our starting point in terms of having a discussion. And at this point, Councillor Bridgeman, we'd like to hand it back to you. Jim has just sent me an email indicating that he is moving from his boathouse to another suitable location, and he will be re-available in about 20-25 minutes from now, and be able to at that time join in on the discussion. With that being said, given that I was relying on Jim for that point, if David wishes to add anything into what I just said, that would be appreciated. If not, that's fine. And I would hand it then back to you, Councillor Bridgeman, for a discussion on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pink, would you like to add anything?
I think I would just, I think the committee members have been sitting around waiting to provide their opinion. I think I'm happy to respond to any questions, and Mr. McDonald and I am sure we'll try to field those as best we can. I do have some sort of maybe comments or suggestions as the discussion goes on.
Sorry, Councillor Jaglowitz, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can.
So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I have 3 comments on this subject, and there is a very broad general subject, so it's difficult to understand whether these apply here or elsewhere. But one example is that we've gone through recently in the township is a lake referred to as Meridian Lake, which was an undeveloped lake, which now is being developed. It would seem to me that we're concerned about the lake system health of that lake, and so there should be some provision in there to allow or to provide more study done before these lakes are allowed to develop. So I just thought maybe you could, I'll go through my 3 points and you can comment at the end. The next thing is that we have docks out into the water do have an effect on the lake, and our current bylaw allows 25% of the frontage up to 75 feet. And that seems fair enough, except what we're seeing now, at least in one case, where the owner decided to take advantage of that. And if you took a lot that was allowed the full 75 feet, they could build 12 6-foot wide docks going out into the lake as long as they weren't joined at the shore. And that would allow a boat to be parked on either side. So you kind of means that 6-foot dock with a boat on either side is 18 feet and times 12 is covering a heck of a lot. So there's some flaw there that should be looked at. And the last item I was going to raise is that we can't just look at residential. We have to also look at high density commercial development on the waterfront. And that takes many forms. And I think that there should be some way of ensuring that that first 200 feet on the waterfront isn't just crowded. So I hope when you get deeper into the policies, they'll deal with some of those issues. Thank you.
So, I believe Mr. Pink would like to speak.
If you wish, just in response to that, Summer Valentine, I believe, just cut out, but she may wish to comment. Summer, the question was with respect to Mary Jane Lake, and I believe it previously wasn't on the modeling or the sampling program, just due to its small size and remoteness. But perhaps Summer can expand on the program in that respect. With respect to your comments on docks, I think you may be touching on an additional policy direction. I don't know if we would lump that under lake system health, but there are currently policies in the township official plan that say docks are permitted up to 25% of your frontage, up to a maximum of 75 feet. They're very detailed for official plan policy. If council wishes to change that, to explore either changing the width permitted or perhaps being more prescriptive on the number of docks permitted on a property. You're correct, Councillor Jaglowitz. Someone could take that 75 feet and construct 75 1-foot docks, I suppose, and it would technically comply with our official plan and zoning bylaw. If that's something council wishes to greater control, this committee, certainly that could be an additional policy direction, whether a greater limitation on dock widths and dock quantities be floated to the public for their comments. But I think that would be a separate topic than particularly the policy direction that the consulting team is looking for specifically here. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. And in terms of the commercial resort, we're not actually dealing with that right now, Councillor Jaglowitz. So I'm not sure on a process basis, Mr. Pink, what do we do with that?
Thank you. I know that was touched on earlier. I didn't comment, but again, we've indicated, again, the consulting team and I feel that we really need to move in lockstep with the district in reviewing their resort policies before we move on ours. But again, that could be a discussion amongst this group, perhaps at the end of Friday, whether that is an additional policy direction. Happy to have that discussion, but I think the committee needs to be cognizant that LPAT and others have opined on the interpretation of district resort policies, and we need to be in conformity with that. Any attempts to amend our official plan that would not conform with those policies largely essentially be somewhat of a waste of time, as the district would not be able to approve of them.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. Councillor Jaglowitz, would you like a follow-up?
Yes, just briefly. I wonder, Mr. Pink, if you could refer me to the policy number where we'll be discussing docks just at some point, so that we can continue that discussion there. One more again, Madam Chair. I'm not trying to sneak in a discussion of resorts here. That's not what my intent was. My intent was, if we talk about lake system health, we can't just deal with residential properties. We have to deal with all the properties that are on the lake. And I'm talking about broad general statements that are there to protect our environment and the lake. And if we exclude certain development to a later time, I just don't think we're doing our job. But at least thanks for listening to my comment. I believe Mr. Pink would like to speak.
Sorry, not trying to dominate the discussion, just clarify again that the lake system health policies do apply to all designations. So they apply to the waterfront designation that includes residential and commercial development. The commercial development is not excluded from the lake system health program.
Okay, thank you. So I think I've got a lot of people who want to speak. I'm not quite sure whether we, in terms of looking more at the docks and the links and the widths, etc., I would guess that we may have a general consensus that we would like to put more restrictions in place. Just not sure if I'm jumping the gun here before people speak. So I'll just leave that. Mayor Harding, I see you would like to speak, please.
Thank you. And just to chime in briefly on docks and everything else, I think we're dealing with that predominantly in our zoning bylaw. Anybody who's got a 3,000-foot property and is only entitled to 75 feet of dock, I don't see him building 10 6-foot wide docks along the way. So I don't see too much abuse on the docks personally right now, but I'm happy to look for it going forward. Regarding lake health, what I liked about what Mr. McDonald said, where we have causation studies, where we have certain lakes that are problem children, so to speak, as we move forward, I would look at putting policies for increased setbacks, increased shoreline buffers in those particular cases. I think that's a smart move at this particular point. And just some high level policies saying, hey, if all these are this part of this lake, then we need to add an extra 10% setbacks on everything along the way, whatever that number is. But from a high level policy, I would support that 100%.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Kelly?
Yeah, I want to, maybe it's the heat that's getting to me, but I'm struggling to understand why the commercial resort development issue is being put off. It seems to me this is the right, maybe not the right time, but certainly the right venue and the right group to deal with that issue. I think the township has far more at risk and far more of an investment in the outcome of how we decide to regulate that than does the district. And I also think, I mean, certainly I've understood the township can always prescribe more restrictive rights when it comes to the development of commercial resorts than the district does. So I'm not sure how we're well served by waiting until the outcome of the district's review.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. So I am going to go back to I think what we said was we could discuss that to the commercial resorts tomorrow after we finish with our agendas for today and tomorrow. So at the moment, they are not part of this discussion, and I would like to leave it that way so that we can compartmentalize and move it off to tomorrow as an individual topic. So that would be what I would like to do. Mr. McDonald?
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to respond quickly. In terms of the discussion moving forward, I know it'll go off in a lot of different directions. What we're specifically looking for today is feedback on what we have suggested as a policy direction. And while there may be many comments and ideas and thoughts, what we're really looking forward to hearing about is the policy direction as we've written it and whether it works for you or not. So in your comments, please try to do that going forward. In response to the specific comments being made, yes, there are a lot of factors that go into planning around lakes, and lake system health is one part of it. Another component, of course, is recreational carrying capacity. That's obviously intrinsically linked. And certainly there will be a discussion on that. I think you'll hear at that time that particularly for smaller and mid-sized lakes, lake planning is a great way to deal with a lot of the issues that with respect to development and the environment and the relationships between the two. So that's something we'll have a conversation about at that point. The comment about docks, it looks like that may be a separate policy direction, and we can come back to that tomorrow in our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. We had a power hit in our area, and I lost connection for about 5-10 minutes. So I unfortunately did not hear all the comments that were suggested before I came back. So I apologize if I'm going to repeat the questions or the issues. I just want to pick up on Mr. McDonald. You made a comment, and I don't know the complete context of it, but you said we want feedback on what Meridian had recommended. So does that mean you don't want feedback on all the other ideas we have?
No, that's certainly not what I was saying.
Out of the context, good. Just leave it. Just leave it.
Right.
Just leave it. I just sorry about that. I just got the sense. I got one other question before I go into anything. As you're aware, you indicated you received a lot of feedback from many people. So I assume you don't want us to repeat that feedback right now, or do you?
I guess from my perspective, I don't want to put any limitations on what anyone wants to say. I don't think that's fair. Not everyone has read what everyone else has submitted, so I think it's fair game. We're here to listen to you.
Okay.
And if you wish to go through your comments already made in writing, please do. This is an appropriate forum for that. So we don't want to put any limitations on that. All I was saying is, if at all possible, if there was a way to reflect upon what we've come up with, at least as a basis for the starting point of whatever you want to talk about. So because at the end of the day, David, Jim, and I have to sort of sit down after 6 hours and figure out, well, we made recommendations, we had a broad discussion, but we're not sure what we're doing with them. So some clear direction on that would be helpful too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So then I'll proceed with that guidance. So in lake system health, your first one was to mirror the MOP. I'm supportive of everything that's written in the MOP, but I would like anything that we do mirror or include be put right into our official plan. I did spend a considerable amount of time reviewing. Thank you very much. You sent me the links to the PPS and the MOP. So I did look through it. A lot of information in there. But I think some of it is not totally all needed to be, if we just refer to section C5, there's just too much there. So we need to bring the salient important points into ours. And then then at that point, we'll be able to, if we desire to do so, then be more restrictive. Or we can't be less as restrictive, but we can be more restrictive. Under the causation studies, you mentioned that you say that the causation studies, and it's explained in detail in the MLP. I like the control what was put in. Did in your background information you were providing, you said that causation studies would be done when the resources and staff and time is appropriate with the district. And when that is good and bad, because in the meantime, our lakes that are listed on the causation studies are continuing to fail. So I think that the control needs to go in right away. Leonard Lake was recently added last year to the list, so there are 7 lakes. Through the lake system health, one of the things that came out loud and clear in the workshop last year and during the campaign, which we all ran on, was the environment first policy. So we need to make sure that comes out loud and clear, in my opinion, and I would think of most of the constituents that voted for us, that environment first must be considered with every policy that we come up with. I did send you a number of comments. I'm just going to skip over some because I'm sure you're going to consider them. So that was a causation study. This might be off topic, but I'm finding that when we do studies, or we ask consultants to do studies for us, they all come back with their own flavor of report. I have been talking to 2 planning companies in the Muskoka area, or one for sure, and he referenced another one. They would welcome having a standard format that all planners would use. So so for lake health, where we have all these studies, the policy direction should include standardization. I know that I've seen some. Matter of fact, on Leonard Lake, Beacon Environmental had used a template that they work with Hessel or Hutchison's to create, and it gave a pretty good checklist of everything in that area. And I think that we need to move along that area, get a standardization. The lake plans on lake health. We have recognized that lake associations have very strong knowledge in some cases, many cases, and understand what's happening. So we need policies to outline how the lake plans will be included in the OP, how they will be recognized. I know that the lake plans will possibly come with policies that we do not, we, the township and the district may not, or the PPS, they contradict it, and we're not supportive of it, but we need to, if we accept the lake plan, we need to know or to communicate what we support And then, so the lakes are totally knowledgeable of where we stand. The PPBS was revised in 2020. I think I request that we go into the PPS, those what the new updates in there under water quality or water may not be reflected. There was a lot of climate change, so we need to look at those to go into the to get into our lake health. So I probably have more, but I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I have Patricia Arney, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Councillor Roberts. I think you've covered some of what I wanted to include. I am a little concerned that we haven't started the discussion as to whether or not we wish to accept the district trigger for a causation study, or if we wish to develop further considerations. And of course, climate change is one of the things. I think water temperature has a big influence on some of our issues, such as algae growth, and of course the blue-green algae. So I'm really looking to probably a limnologist to assist us in maybe refining and being a little more specific and maybe a little more demanding in our assessment of lakes that might need a causation study. Leonard Lake has been added because Leonard Lake has a strong lake association. And one of the things in the district OP under the lake system health is reference to the municipalities joining with, involving, and I guess that partly relates to what Councillor Roberts spoke to about the lake plans. And I know, David, I won't go through your title, has mentioned before that we've always accepted lake plans to be incorporated into our OP, but we haven't had many submitted. So I think we need some sort of policy to encourage that engagement from the lake associations, and maybe to encourage more lake associations to carry out some of the water studies that someday may be standardized. And also, of course, we have the concern about the Lake Partner Program, whether it is going to be resumed next year or not. So to be specific, my issue is, are we going to go with the district OP lake system health plan causation triggers, or are there other triggers that we might be considering? Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And next is David Scalati.
Yeah, I was also going to chime in on the stewardship plan concept. I know David Pink has mentioned several times, as Patricia just mentioned, that we like stewardship plans, but we've never incorporated them into the OP. So maybe this is the place where they should be put. And the reason I really like the stewardship plan idea is that it encourages local engagement. So it's one thing to put a site plan together for a piece of property that's changing hand or a new build is going to occur, but there are 100 times more lots that aren't changing hands in a year that we still need to worry about. I have 2 neighboring lots, both of which sold over the last year. And usually the second thing that people do when they move in is to cut down all the vegetation in front because they want a really good view of the water. And it's sickening for me, frankly, to see that. And I'm usually pretty nosy, so I stick my my foot in it and explain to them that that's probably not a good idea and give them some information to support it. And they always say, geez, I wish I'd known about that before. And I think stewardship plans and lake plans would help give that information. Now, of course, if it's a new buyer, they're not going to know. So it's important somewhere along the line to get those people engaged. But in terms of the associations themselves, if we really want buy-in, we need to be sure that this kind of information is coming up on a regular basis at their annual meetings or through their newsletters, et cetera. So I'm all for the lake plan idea of being incorporated somewhere in the OP. Thank you.
Okay, Bob, Mr. Clark?
So I agree with everything that's, there's a lot of things that have been talked about. I agree we shouldn't have, 6 docks on one property. There should be some sort of limitation. I don't know why we're adopting stricter plans than what the district is looking at. I agree with David. We have an issue. When I say David Scolati, I agree with David that we have an issue with properties that are being purchased that do not come under site plan control. So we should probably do something. So what's happened to him and his, and his 2 neighbors' properties where people are going in and clear cutting, maybe there needs to be some sort of site plan control, but something needs to trigger that. Right now, generally, it's a building permit addition, dock addition, something of that nature. I can tell you that I mainly do new builds, and I do an awful lot of renovations. But on the new build side, the current process that we need to go through, and I know I've mentioned this before, I'm just reminding people, the current process that we have to go through at this point to get site plan approval is not a rubber stamp from the township. There is a significant amount of not just negotiation, education of the purchaser and the buyer of what they're allowed to do, as it relates to tree removal, where watershed as in tennis courts, et cetera, can be placed. As we've said, septics have been moved significantly back. Our standards continue to improve. And I think the township and staff have done a fantastic job of going through that process. What I will tell you is I had multiple letters of support that I wanted to send in. Unfortunately, some of the language I would have needed to clean up from some friends, because there is a growing concern that we are now getting too restrictive on people's personal property rights. So as it relates to, you can't build a tennis court, you can't have a fire pit near the lake, you can't have certain attributes that many of our clients on the real estate side are looking for. And frankly, they're also the hottest commodity on the sales and building side. So I would just say that when we keep, there's nothing wrong with us considering exceeding what the district is doing. I don't know on a legal side how that sets us up for, challenges as it relates to some of our wealthy constituents challenging these exceeded requirements. And frankly, I still say we have very, very limited input. I mean, when we have these groups like Friends of Muskoka and Muskoka Lakes Association, we're saying we're representing 18,000 people, 2,000 people, all of these types of things. Many of the people that actually voted for council on the environmental side and are supporting these groups believe, my feedback is they believe their funding, et cetera, was to stop the resort planning and abuse of resorts that we're going. Now that we're swinging things over to personal property rights, we're going to start getting a lot of different feedback. And why are we using funds in that direction? Anyway, those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Liz?
I'll unmute. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that what the district has done, I think admirably in its plan, has set out this lake system health, and that means both lakes and rivers, I believe, has established that as a first principle. It is the basis of the policy, and that all development should take place in a manner that conserves the features and function and interconnectedness of nature. So I think that's a primary target of policy. I think it should be a first principle, environment first. As Mr. McDonald noted, we're right sort of at the basement level. This is a good policy direction, and I think it should be the foundation of our policy direction. The Muskoka Lakes Association is in contact with smaller lake associations to develop lake plans. I think that work will continue. They're somewhat costly to produce, but I don't think that stops the township from establishing in our OP that this is really a first principle for us. And of course, as things go on, implementation will be very key. And that's where we get down to the level of zoning bylaws and so forth. But I would like to say that I fully support the notion that we put the environment first and that this is a first principle for all of our OP.
Thank you. So I see Mr. McDonald would like to speak again. So perhaps, excuse me, Mr. McDonald, I'm going to let you in when you want to speak because you're probably reacting to what's just been said. So that might make more sense. Now, perhaps you don't have your hand up. I have it up on my screen. So I'm going to go to Councillor Edwards. Oh, is that what it is? Okay, technical moment.
It was Ken FaceTiming, so I'll wait until after.
So I'm going to let Councillor Edwards speak and then.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. You know, the district of Muskoka says it's a national leader, and I think we should take the strictest policies from all the different areas and incorporate them. But also, I think when I was first elected back in 2010, the Muskoka ratepayers had a very good suggestion, and I did mention it to council at the time, but it was never taken up on. And basically what they wanted to do is basically an owner's manual. So when somebody bought a property or they come into the building department, they got the rules, and it was like, why not our rules on handling it, but something on why vegetation is important and everything else like that, so that they would understand. And I think some of the contractors would benefit from that, because some of the contractors are doing stuff that are opposite to what we're asking for. So it's just a case of that education is a big part of it, but stricter regulations are actually required. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Mr. McDonald, would you like to speak? Your hand is up. Mr. McDonald, you're muted. Neither. All right, so I don't know if we're having some technical issues here. David Scalati, would you like to speak again?
Yeah, I just had a comment after listening to what Bob Clark had to say, and it's a very small point, and I'm not sure where it falls except under Lake Health. I just received my latest Cottage Life magazine, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Usually I really enjoy the magazine. But in this issue, they have an article about building outdoor showers. And the only outdoor showers I have in my neighborhood, unfortunately, run into the lake. So again, I don't know where it would fall. When somebody adds it on, it's usually just done because they want to, and they don't get a building permit for it. But right next to the shower, of course, are a couple of bottles of shampoo and some soap, and it just runs into the lake. So certainly that should come under lake health as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Patricia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one comment to follow up on the MRA suggestion. Muskoka Watershed Council has a very good handbook for living by the water, which might be worth investing in. And just, I'm not sure if we've lost Mr. McDonald or not, but I wanted to ensure that we are going to have a fulsome discussion of recreational carrying capacity after we get past lake system health.
I'm back.
And we're glad you are.
I'm parked at your back door now, so everything's clear, and we will have a fulsome discussion.
Okay, great. So yes, we will get to recreational carrying capacity. I'm going to let Mr. Pink speak, and then I'm wondering if we could wrap up this section. I think our consultants have had a lot of input here, but I will let Mr. Pink take the floor.
Thank you for that, Chair Bridgeman. Actually, you just took the words out of my mouth. I'm just cognizant of time. We're about an hour and a half into the first meeting. We're still on item 1. A lot of the comments we've had are excellent, but we're getting into quite details about lake plans, owner manuals, implementation things. I wouldn't worry about these sort of more procedural matters or details that wouldn't go into the OP. We currently have lake plan policies. We're strongly encouraging them. I think more lakes associations will come forward to us. There were 2 pieces, though, I'd like to unpack a little bit, earlier comments that I think do actually relate to this policy direction, and I don't know if it warrants changing. They both relate to causation studies. I think Councillor Roberts indicated he would like to see the causation studies earlier, and I believe Patricia Arney indicated different triggers for causation studies. Those are 2 significant things that would differ or diverge from the district policy, which is what this policy direction says. Perhaps Senator Valentine, not to put you on the spot, can provide some additional details, but right now the District of Muskoka budgets for causation studies and has a schedule to complete them. If the township wishes to be more involved with the district on those causation studies and increase the schedule as suggested by Councillor Roberts, there will be budgetary implications to that. And also different triggers for the causation study. Again, if the Township of Muskoka Lakes implements different triggers, that will mean more causation studies than the District of Muskoka would require. That would fall on the township then to hire consultants to complete causation studies on more lakes. And again, perhaps very briefly, Summer can give a just brief indication of the time and the cost of each causation study. That's just something to consider. But those are the only areas that I've heard in the discussion so far that I think would diverge from the policy direction that that the consultants have put out, is whether we do want to change, again, those triggers and get more involved in causation studies and have the township do those as opposed to leave that lying with the district. But again, in the interest of time, we're still on item 1. We need to start moving efficiently through these to make progress.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. So would Mr. Dyment, would you like to, now that you're on hopefully good internet, would you like to take over again from Mr. McDonald? Well, maybe
have we completed our discussion then on the lake system health?
I believe we have. I've got a shaking of heads from some people. We have Councillor Roberts has his hand up. I'm going to let him speak, and then I do believe we need to move on. Councillor Roberts.
Just a point of clarification, I wasn't proposing that the Township of Muskoka Lakes would take on causation studies, but I was proposing that any lake that is in a causation study area, the controls must be put on right now until the district has the time to do the causation study. I do support Patricia's Arnie's comment that we need to go deeper and consider more than just phosphorus. That is the key of causation studies. And yes, there will be cost, but what value do we put to a good environment?
Okay, thank you for that. Now I turn it back to Mr. McDonald or Mr. Dyment. I think we are wrapping up this section. If maybe one of you could sort of tell us what your thoughts are on where you're going to go with this, that would be appreciated.
I think Jim speaking here, Nick is not in and I've been moving while we've been doing it, but clearly the municipality has the ability to put policies in the official plan that will enable causation studies, I think at an earlier time or earlier triggers. There's nothing that prohibits the municipality from going beyond the district's policies in either of the causation studies section or the lake health section.
Okay, so you're going to take all of these comments then, and I assume that's what you're going to go out to the public with. I just need a little bit more clarity. We've talked about a lot, so I know Mr. Pink identified a couple of policy areas that are a little different or changed from what we had here. You would be including those in the public comments? Is that, I'm just trying to get a handle on that.
Yes, we would reflect that in the planning directions recommendations that go to the public.
Okay, thank you. That answered my question. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to recreational carrying capacity. I assume, Mr. Dyment, you're going to take this away now?
I'm alive and well. Yeah, so we had lengthy discussions with the working group about the issue of recreational carrying capacity. I know the municipalities had a presentation from my colleague, Mr. Usher, on it. And we have suggested as part of the policy direction that we include policies in the Muskoka Lakes official plan that enable the application of recreational carrying capacity in considering lot creation proposals on small and medium-sized lakes. And that is because the model doesn't really work that well for large lakes. So for small and medium-sized lakes, we found that it did work quite well, and policies could enable the use of it throughout the township on those lakes. So that's part of it. The other part of the policy direction would be that where the recreational carrying capacity model showed that a lake was near or over capacity in accordance with the model, that the policies in the official plan would set up provisions that would be carried forward into the zoning bylaw that would put additional regulations, it's probably through a different zone, on those lakes that would reduce permissions for docks, require larger lot sizes, particularly frontages has been what I've found to be successful. And other permissions that would otherwise be permitted would be limited on those lakes that are at or near capacity. And so our recommendation has been based on that, and I'll leave it with you there to discuss.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. I don't see anybody's hand up. In terms of, unless we embed this in our policy as basically a hard cap or a hard what's the term I'm looking for? As Seguin did, they made it part of the official plan and it held up an LPAT. My concern is if it's part of a toolbox and we try to defend this at LPAT, it isn't going to work. So I would love to hear a comment on that because we've had a lot of difficulty with LPAT and our plan and our OP plan.
Madam Chair, would you like me to weigh in on that?
Oh, yes, please.
It is difficult, as you've heard from a number of people, to say that recreational carrying capacity is based on absolute science. But one of the things that the LPAT decision in Seguin and other decisions in Halliburton have taught us is that the board has said that recreational carrying capacity is a community standard that's been accepted by the community and approved by council, and therefore attention needs to be paid to it. And so I think that there is value in including it as a criteria. Seguin included it as an absolute yes or no and have been successful at doing that. I would also say that the provincial policy statement now leans more to municipalities developing policies that are specific for their municipalities. And so I have greater confidence now than I used to that if you included it in your official plan, it would carry weight as a community and council approved standard.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't, Mr. McDonald, did you want to say something? I see your screen lighting up there.
Yes, thank you very much. My computer actually decided to freeze on me and do all kinds of weird things. So I lost contact for about 5 or 10 minutes. So I apologize for that, but I'm now back and I'll continue listening. Thank you.
Okay, well, seeing as I don't see any hands, I'm going to continue with my thought. Oh, I've got lots of hands. I'm going to just do my one other thought then. I believe that we need to have this in however you professionally do it, so it's defendable at LPAT. And I do believe that in certain bays on our large lakes, this would be a great tool. And Wallace Bay would be one of the ones that I would highlight. And we have other bays that are concerned about overcapacity. So those would be my comments. All right, so Councillor Jaglowitz, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And once again, I was using the blue hand. That's why you didn't see my real hand. Actually, I concur with you 100%. I think that RCC should include areas of the big 3 lakes. Wallace Bay is an example. I think there have been studies done there. I think you can carve out a piece. I don't see any reason to, to try to impose it on one of the large lakes in total would not work. I agree with that. But I think you can take pieces where there are difficulties, and I think that would make sense for this group to identify a few and let's get started, and others can be added later. So I fully support this endeavor.
Thank you, Councillor Jaglowitz. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. Just to confirm, we're just going to talk about the recreational carrying capacity now, and then we're going to kind of go on to the reduced permission on docks in this section. So on RCC, I agree. Small lakes are certainly important, and just want to have clarification. The language you use, and just make sure you talk about enable the application or implement the application. I mean, are we subjectively saying yes, we want to do it or not, or it is becoming a hard and fast application of the rule type of thing, or there's a rule? So I just want to make sure that we are consistent across and try and take out a council flavor of the month as we go forward. I am concerned about recreational carrying capacity on larger bodies of water in specified bays. For example, if you were to take the Indian River in Port Carling on Lake Rosso, or on especially Lake Muskoka, it would flag as overdeveloped. I don't care how you look at it. At any given time, there's way too many boats in that bay. Let's take Foots Bay and the marina there. Way too many boats. And for what traditionally would be a recreational carrying capacity. So how do we manage any kind of, we say no more development, that means no shops in Port Carling can expand because they would be utilizing the docks. That's my fear when we look at this. And I know we're all trying to control, and I'll be blunt about it, Wallace Bay, but are there other ways to just understand? It's funny, we talk about the permissions considered right now within Wallace Bay and how many boats can park places. and I'll stick my foot in my mouth here, because if you were to go pull into Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club, they are qualified, if you did just the length of docks, for like 150 boats. Now, we know they never put that many boats there, but based on lot size and widths and everything else, we would flag that as a development that is way over capacity. And there'd be many people who'd be probably watching this call would say, hey, well, don't take away Muskoka Lakes docks, because they want to be able to go golfing. So I just want to be careful when we implement this in certain areas, that we understand the true implications of where we're going. Small lakes I'm good with. The larger lakes I struggle with.
Okay, thank you. Patricia?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor Harding. I actually agree with you. I'm very concerned about the recreational capacity model. Everyone admits it's not an exact science, and the fact that it stood up at LPAT to me is not necessarily a good thing, because we want to establish a model that is almost inevitably going to take us to LPAT. It is of concern to me. I would like clarification on how we identify small and medium-sized lakes. Is that according, I believe I recall a district having done that at one time, but I'm not sure if we're using that model or identification of the small and medium-sized lakes. And there are other concerns and possibly triggers that we could look at. I think the recreational carrying capacity model is in its early stages, despite having survived LPAT twice. So I certainly would not like to see it embedded as Seguin did, but used as one of several tools to identify further development restrictions on various lakes or areas of lakes, as Wallace Bay and others have been mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of good input here, and it's obvious that it will not be decided the pros and cons of implementing a carrying capacity model in this call. It appears there's pros and cons that we really have to get in depth conversation with. So I'm supporting not a recreational carrying capacity, but I'm supporting a carrying capacity, because recreational doesn't really take into much consideration if it could be in the formula for the environment and the wildlife. So rather than referring to as a recreational carrying capacity, we should consider implementing a carrying capacity. Now, the idea of a carrying capacity has been around since before 2004. There is documentation that talks about how the formula is calculated, and I think the township, we should go do some in-depth studies on what would be best for the township of Muskoka Lakes. We should not dismiss the use of carrying capacity model in the lakes without a very thorough conversation. So that's my input.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Roberts. Liz Mundell?
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. And look, I guess what we're debating here is whether we develop an RCC model for strict application, or whether we're really considering it as a guideline to consider. And I understand the challenges at LPAT if we don't do the first. Thank you for raising the issue of bays on larger lakes. And also I'd like to raise the Indian River and Little Joe River as other areas that may have reached capacity. So the difficulty we have is that if there's a road that reaches capacity and can't handle any more traffic, we widen it. We can't do that with our waterways or our bays or smaller and medium-sized lakes. I think that recreational capacity could also consider factors such as habitat parameters that Councillor Roberts mentioned, and also the impact on the potential to diminish recreational experience. And in fact, that may be even more important. So I would like to, my view would be that I would like to see the development of an RCC model for application, especially on the small and medium-sized lakes, and as well as the narrow water bodies we've referenced.
Okay, thank you very much. Bob Clark, please.
Hi, I just wanted to reiterate, I'll support what Phil Harding had to say. I think our challenge is what we agreed even in our last meeting is that the current calculations work on certain size lakes and they don't appear to work on our large lakes. So we need some methodology for where the formula, you know, we all agree it doesn't work. So what's the methodology to come up with a format that does work? And frankly, this is probably an area where we can say we're special, we're different. And how do we deal with that? And potentially work with somebody like Huntsville who has Lake of Bays, Fairy Mary, Penn, which would probably be sort of the closest thing to what we've got going, and try to come up with some methodology that'll work, because we keep sort of talking about bays in specific areas, but in those areas, I'm not proposing that I'm in favor of anything that's happening in those bays. What I'm just saying is, you know, we have a different set of circumstances on small lakes. We can't put, you know, large developments and things of that nature. The land, et cetera, just isn't available. So, anyway, I think it's gonna be tough for us to solve, and we can say where the formula works, adopt it. But what are we going to do about where it doesn't work? We have nothing to adopt.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards?
Alan, your audio isn't on.
You're muted. We can't hear you.
There we go. Sorry. You can hear me now. Thanks through the chair. I agree with Councillor Harding. I think we do need either recreational carrying capacity for the smaller lakes or carrying capacity. Some of the smaller lakes, they are getting watts created on them that are over carrying capacity at this time. Unless we put something in that has teeth to it, we'll never get there. Large lakes, it's almost impossible to get carrying capacity, because if you talk about the Indian River, Joe River, I don't know how you'd ever handle that, because that's boat traffic going through there. And that's so, but on the small to medium lakes, yes, we should have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Mayor Harding?
Thank you. Through you, just one more quick comment on that. Again, the issue on development of, let's say, the Little Joe River, you know, if people who want to put a boat there, they're not skiing in front of their place. It's already limited. We control, it's a narrow water body. We control dock width, we control length, we control boathouse width. You know, the issue is everybody out who's in the big lake that decides to go through the Little Joe River, or everybody who's out in the big lake that decides to go to Abby's Bakehouse and SWS Marine. So do we keep all them out of those bays because it's over capacity too? So like, that's really the issue on the big lakes and trying to control something in a narrow area. The more boats the rest of the lake, if there's an attraction in that area or a throughfare, they're going through it no matter what we do. So I just don't see how it factors into a big lake.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Harding. So I am going to suggest, and maybe you can, Mr. Dyment, that we do you have enough material now? And do you understand sort of the direction we'd like to see? I know we don't have a consensus here, but everybody wants part of this. I'm just looking at the clock again and trying to help move us on if you also feel we've had a fulsome discussion on this.
Well, certainly we've some interesting things that have been raised and some thoughts for us moving forward in terms of application. I wouldn't mind a little bit more discussion. I know this seems odd when we spend so long on a hard or a soft cap. Is it a guideline or a strict criteria?
Okay, I will say to you, having listened to everybody, it sounds like it's a hard cap on the small and medium lakes from what I'm gathering and the heads I'm seeing here. But on the large lakes, we need to come up with, as Bob Clark said, a different way of doing that calculation. So that would be my comment. Now we have Councillor Jaglowitz who would like to chime in.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to respond to the amount of boat traffic in areas, and I'll just use Wallace Bay going to the bakery, for example. There's a difference between docks that are there to hold boats for people that have, let's say, a cottage or condominium in that area, and they use that for water sports in that area. That's a different use than docks that are provided to allow people to come to public facilities there. And I think that's really the difference, that the RCC or CEC or whatever it is should be prohibiting the number of lots or buildings that have people that live in that area, as opposed to trying to limit docks for people that travel there for the services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that point. Mayor Harding, I think you might have the last word here.
Yeah, not a problem. And I realize council's looking at a hard cap on the small lakes. I'm probably more on the fact as a starting policy. We have not implemented RCC before. Personally, I would probably vote to a guiding principle along the way right now as a stepping stone, so to speak, in this first P of ours. Obviously, I'm going to be at the will of council and where we want to go. But when it becomes very black and white, there's always lots of gray in every development. So if it's a new guiding principle for people, then we can use that as council sees fit and varying other parameters versus, nope, you're over RCC, too bad. Because if you look at many of our small lakes, everything's probably over RCC, which means zero development.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, the good news is we don't have to come to a conclusion today. This is just going to, and we'll hear what the public has to say as we move on. Mr. Dyment, anything more from you?
Well, I think it's been a very good discussion. Certainly a lot of things that I will think of and will bring back to the working group and the public.
Terrific. Then I believe we can, I know, Mr. McDonald, you said we'll break at noon. We have 12 minutes. So I think we can carry on with the flooding hazards on lakes, Mr. Dyment.
Great, thank you. So quickly, we know that 2017, 2019 have brought historic floods to Muskoka. We need to do more than what we have historically done. This should include new mapping as well as policies that protect both people and property as well as the environment from the impacts of flooding. Members who have had the ability to look at the new district flooding map will see that there are quite a few existing properties that are now recognized as being subject to flooding. And so the official plan needs to contain policies, or our recommendation for policies is that the official plan should contain policies that, first of all, deal with the issue of climate change in terms of stormwater management and trying to reduce flooding. We've also included recommendations about prohibition of use of storage of other things other than boats and non-hazardous boating equipment in boathouses, such things as appliances and hazardous materials within the boathouses themselves, We've all seen photographs of the gasoline tanks and things floating up after the flooding. Certainly prohibition on habitable space within the floodplain. All of these things are required by the provincial policy statement, and we believe that they should be included in the Township of Muskoka Lakes official plan, and that the township should also, as part of the site plan approval process and agreements, get people to recognize the fact that if they're building a boathouse on the lake and it floods and it damages, that the municipality is under no liability for issuing the building permit. So those are a quick summation of our recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Well, group, we have comments. I see that Bob Clark would like to speak.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, so that was a whole bunch of stuff in that comment. And actually, I've had a lot of experience in a lot of the areas that we're talking about. I'll say it started with one of the first properties I developed, or at least built a cottage on, where I found out subsequently that we were in a floodplain because unfortunately my realtor, which in this case wasn't me, didn't know what they were talking about. But I was standing about 10 feet above the lake and found out that on a rock cliff, and was told that I was on a floodplain. As I was standing there, I realized that if I was on a floodplain, Bermuda was probably in trouble if I flooded. So the reality is that at that time, and it is a little ways back, it's in the early to mid 2005, our floodplain mapping was done on a 10,000 to 1 foot basis. So it was like horrifically inaccurate. And by the way, it's up to a property buyer owner to actually go get a pile of surveying and topographicals done to undo this mistake in improper zone flagging. So that's one point on just our floodplain mapping. Is it all accurate? And I'm sure it's generally accurate, but it is certainly not completely accurate. I think when we talk about flooding, and if we talk about development on the water, and we're talking about these lounges, et cetera, in lower boathouses, you have to remember that these areas are being called storage. They don't have bedrooms. Certainly, I'm not going to pretend that they don't have habitable space and fridges and appliances and all of those types of things. I think it's wrong, and it's actually a big demand from certainly a lot of the clients we see in the real building side. They do want habitable shaded space in lower boathouses. They do want appliances, et cetera. And I believe that we should put something in place that says, as part of your site plan agreement to build these things, that we absolutely, let people know that they have no comeback to the township. The federal, provincial governments or regulatory bodies to sue them. If they have insurance, go get insurance, which is next to impossible to get. But it is, if you're doing that stuff in a boathouse or in a property on the water that's clearly in a floodplain, you're doing that at your own risk. I would also say that, let's remember the stuff that we're building today is to a much higher standard than a lot of these boathouses and things where you're seeing gas cans and all kinds of things go flying out of there. I can tell you, people are spending over $1 million to build these 2-story boathouses with finished lower areas. Those people have property managers that are pulling things out of their boathouses when things are flooding. They're not leaving appliances to float down the river. So I just wanted to give a bit of color on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hayes?
Okay, just a few points. We do recognize that flooding is seasonal, and you want to prohibit uses in a boathouse to that of a boathouse. Where the lounge areas are, if we prohibit it, how are you going to grandfather that? Or are you going to grandfather that? Or are they just going to have to rip them out? In C, prohibit large appliances. Could they be in a two-story boathouse? They go to the second story. In a one-story boathouse, they have to be at least 2 feet off of the water level. And because it is seasonal, there should be no storage of hazardous material between November to May. It makes sense to me to have your gas can stored in your boathouse during the summer, because that's when you're going to use it. And I don't think that I would agree with a site plan approval for every new or expanded boathouse, but I'm going to piggyback on what Bob said, and that when you apply for a building permit, you are told at that time that you are on a floodplain and you may be impacted by flooding events. And those were the only comments I had.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Liz Mundell, excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I remember when we looked at these policies, and I'll say I'm in support of them. There was a fifth one, and that was, or sixth one, and that was to do with not putting septic components below the floodplain. And I think that should be revisited. Now that we have the recently updated floodplain mapping from the district, I think we should take a look at that. I was out on Lake Joseph during the flooding of last May and noted that there was a pump that should have been pumping to a tile bed, and it was actually pumping the lake water in and out, in and out, in and out. And I think we should be avoiding those kinds of situations.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts?
Thank you, Matter. Very interesting input on the flooding hazard on the lake. But I guess my comments are, and colleagues that I have discussed this with, that we must, TML must implement policies that stop the flow of toxic substance in the water body. And we had a lot of good examples that have just come up. Councillor Hayes just had suggested. We must continue to partner, and I believe our Mayor Phil Harding is leading the charge with the other agencies to lessen the property damage caused by flooding. We're talking about the hazardous, but I think we have we owe it to our constituents that we do everything possible to stop where the flooding. We were thinking that, or proposing that TML should restrict new construction of boathouses to single stories structures. I know that'll be a large debate, but that's one of the policies we would like to see. TML should limit boat floor area. I have a policy that limits the boat floor area to a small percentage of the total service and restrict these party enclosures or party decks. TML should consider restricting the area allowed for hard surfaces and or require the permeable products. So we get a lot of, the flooding is also comes from the shoreline, and we have an increase of hard surfaces on properties. So we've got to actually put a restriction in how much hard surfaces, man-made hard surfaces, which should be allowed. And I guess this is finally it's a question to David. Is there a way to make site plans enforceable? Can we implement policies to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I believe I'll ask Mr. Pink to answer that question, or right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, committee members that are on council may recall staff brought forward a lengthy report a few months ago to Planning Committee outlining a number of changes or things that could be done to our site plan process to help improve enforceability. A few of those matters we've already undertaken, and we will take steps to continue. a lot of those matters. If you recall, the premise to do that report, the direction staff was given was if money was no object. So certainly other changes to our process to make them more enforceable.
There is an echo coming through, Barb.
But we're exploring all those things through that report that was prepared. Happy to, like I say, go into greater detail of that report, but it was a few months ago. I don't know if we have time today, but I can forward it to committee members if they can't recall.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. So I'm going to call on Mayor Harding.
Thank you very much. My concern about regulation of what's in boathouses and everything else, the title of this section is flooding and hazards on the lake. One thing that we do not do is regulate the elevation of a boathouse. If I want to build it at current water levels, right now I can do so. If I want to build it 4 feet above, I can do so. If someone is to build it 4 feet above today, they can, in all honesty, have a washer and a dryer at that elevation and it's never going to flood. But let's be honest, at our spring flooding, the boats were floating around or boats sunk because the plugs weren't in them when we had the floods. So my belief is, and I like what I think Pat said, or maybe was about whatever that level is, that septic systems in particular, and anything that's hazardous is above a certain elevation. And, if you want to put your washer and dryer on a 3-foot pedestal, that could work. And, I'd rather have a bar fridge down theoretically at the dock versus having to walk up some properties. We've got 100, 150 stairs. People are going to have heart attacks going up and down to try and cool off or hydrate. So, let's not get rid of everything. Let's control what becomes a bad and why it becomes a bad environment. To Councillor Roberts' perspective about, let's eliminate 2-story boathouses. I just want to say one of the reasons that Muskoka is unique, one of the reasons we have extreme property values, one of the reasons that people want to be here is because we have 2-story boathouses, because we have a lot of unique stuff. People have heard this. I don't think this entire committee has heard this from me. As we redevelop properties and we make things into conformity and make things into conformity and make things into conformity, 100 years from now, we have suburbia. Muskoka is not suburbia. I appreciate environment first and rocks and trees, and I've said this before. Anybody who has a property up here or goes for a cruise on the lake when neighbors come up or friends and visitors and our tourism, trust me, I've driven enough pontoon boat tours out of the resorts. Nobody comes in here to see the mighty hemlock on the lot beside me. They love to see whose place that is and some unique boathouses. That does not mean that we need to build a million other boathouses, but let's be respectful. And one of the things I love in our official mission statement right now is to respect where we are, to enhance it, maintain. But if we redevelop, remove all the 2-story boathouses, and every time we do that, if we got rid of every boathouse, we're the same as Peterborough, or we're the same as, Algonquin Park doesn't have any docks, but we will lose. There's a reason we have the highest assessed value of any lake in all of Ontario because of the unique nature of what we currently have. So let's not damage the environment. Let's protect the lake health. And for new lots and new creations and new developments, let's try and do a better job. But let's just find an elevation to build and protect. Your dock, the boards can go underwater potentially if they're too low. But if we put up to a higher level, a fridge or whatever might be considered hazardous, I think it's another way around it.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Mayor Harding. David Scolati.
Yeah, I had a couple of comments on this section. One had to do with overland flooding, obviously, and I would like to echo what Councillor Hayes had to say. I think with any time a permit is issued, if that property may be in a floodplain, the applicant at least ought to know about it. And this is one good place to tell them. I'm not saying you don't grant the permit, but give them a heads up that there is an issue that they need to be aware of. The second one has to do with not just overland flooding, but what is it called? The water table. Because as most of you are probably aware, the water rises in the lake, the river, and underneath your cottage. So I only know about this personally because every year that we have a flood, I also have flooding in my basement, which just comes up along with the river. You know, Bob Clark was mentioning standing 10 feet up on a rock, questioning whether he was in a floodplain or not. On the Moon River, which is where I live, you only have to go up about 8 feet to be in a floodplain. So that's how high the water comes up for us. The other thing I was going to raise is the so-called high water mark, and wondering if there's a real good definition for the high water mark. I've had surveyors explain to me that I may want to have them come back at a different season because the high water mark would be much lower. I know they're trying to help me out so that I can build closer to the water, but I've asked them what the definition is of a high water mark. He says, well, it's what you see out there at the shore. It's where the water touches the shore. Well, again, for me, it's quite different depending upon the season. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Patricia Arney.
Thank you, Chair. And further to Dave's comment, for me, the high water mark varies as according to OPG's operations. So it varies daily from morning to evening. I would like to follow up on overland flooding and stormwater management. There is an excellent report that District commissioned in 2008 from Aquaflora and Beach. It has a lot of specific recommendations on LID development, green versus gray infrastructure. And I haven't seen any of that incorporated into the recommendations that we're looking at in terms of managing flooding through some of these practices that would help control the overland flooding, the LID practices. The other thing is redevelopment in floodplains. I think we need some policies. I tend to agree, having looked very carefully at the new district floodplain mapping, which is much more accurate, Bob, than the previous level of measurement. Certainly, there are a lot of places that are looking to rebuild. Should we be expecting better, more resilient rebuilds? Or are we just going to grandfather them? Certainly, Mayor Harding's comment about building higher or building floating might be something that we would consider. Now, my final comment refers to this business of township giving permission to build in a floodplain. I think at one point there's a suggestion we have them sign a disclaimer. I would really like a legal opinion on whether or not that would cover. I'm not sure how we go about giving permission to build in a floodplain now with the new mapping and with the PPS directions and the past flood situations. So I don't know if Summer has a comment or if the consultants have a comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to answer Patricia's question?
I can jump in firstly and indicate that site plan agreements have been used in a whole bunch of different ways across Ontario to somehow ensure that municipalities are not liable for whatever happens. I've seen them used in private road agreements as well, and site plan approval gets applied and someone acknowledges an ambulance can't come by to the house and so on. It's something we should think about clearly, and it may require some additional thought. I'm thinking that in the way we word the policy direction when we go to the public, we word it in such a way that we'll consider it, but it's not a definitive action plan. But your point is very well taken. Site plans are only to be used in accordance with the Planning Act to deal with defined matters, and this probably wouldn't be one of them. But the thing is, if someone enters into such an agreement willingly and signs an acknowledgement willingly, then it also carries weight as well. So that's the two sides of that issue. I don't know if David, you have any additional comments on that?
Okay, so Mr. Pink is indicating to me he doesn't have any additional comments. So Bob Clark.
Again, just a handful of quick comments on a lot of comments people have made. As far as hard surfaces, property improvements, et cetera, I think, you know, adopting a watershed study, if you're looking at paving, putting in tennis courts, doing all of those things as part of your site plan approval is absolutely reasonable. Those hard surfaces are creating erosion, et cetera. So I'm certainly in support of that. There was a comment about smaller, lower dock areas, et cetera. If we're keeping the same dock widths and the same building standards, then what that's going to equal is more boats. So if you don't allow lower level storage / lounges, et cetera, now we're going to have more boats and we're going to have our recreational carrying capacity discussion again. Appliances in lower levels, we already, you know, anybody who's got half a brain anymore is actually building appliances up out of the way, able to pull appliances, building electrical plugs, electrical panels, any utilities higher. And then finally, we do septic inspections. And in fact, the township is doing a fantastic job of inspecting septic systems on individual properties to ensure that they are complying, working properly, et cetera. I mean, I've got a reasonably new system. It's 5 years old. It's been inspected 3 times, and it gets inspected by the installer because it's a treatment plant. The systems that we put in a boathouse, those all have to be applied for with the M&R, and they have to be applied with the township, and they're hermetically sealed. So maybe we should be expanding that those units are actually inspected at the same time as the main septic systems at a cottage.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one point very quickly. As more information is concerning climate change becomes available, I think the municipality needs to allow to have revisions that they can easily modify their waterfront, natural heritage, and flooding policies. So that's.
Thank you. I have a question. Is that possible within an OP to be able to say, I'm now going to modify things? I don't have the answer. Would someone be able to tell me that answer?
Well, I will if I can. Okay, go ahead, Nick.
I can jump in on that. We've dealt with that in a number of circumstances before. With flooding hazards, typically hazards change more quickly than you can change an official plan. And when you're dealing with flooding hazards, it's usually the most current information you try to deal with when applications are being considered. And that's in the public interest. Natural heritage, a little bit more challenging, only because there's a fairness component to it. In terms of changing information on the fly without there being a public process is sometimes seen as unfair. So there are a few sides to that. In areas where there is a conservation authority, usually municipalities would defer to the conservation authority and whatever it says. And in some cases, it may change on a seasonal basis in terms of where they think the flooding hazard is. So a couple of things to think about. But we should be very careful about creating policies that allow for their interpretation on the fly, so to speak, depending on circumstance. It may set a precedent that the township doesn't want to follow.
Okay, thank you. Lots of interesting input here for you to take away and put into your policy for the public. So now, Mr. McDonald, do you want to take a short break at this point?
Yes, so I'm thinking we take a 5-minute bio break and we come back and reconvene. We've only gone through 3 policy directions, but they were very meaty policy directions. I think some of the ones that follow we'll be able to go through rather quickly. I'm also thinking that after today's session, David, Jim, and I will talk a little bit more about the 3 we talked about this morning and try to come up with what we think we heard for the purposes of going out to the public. I think that'll benefit everyone here, because there were some divergent opinions, but I think we can come up with a way of crafting directions such that we can still get dialogue and diverse opinions coming back too. But we really do want to. Let's take 5 minutes and then we'll reconvene and put it back in your hands, Councillor Bridgeman, for anyone who wishes to raise another topic that they wish to raise. If there aren't any, we'll dive right back in and go to 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like a good plan. All right, we are going to reconvene at 12:22 on my clock, so 5 minutes from now. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Just making sure we're good on this end. Okay, great. All right, I think as our consultants suggested, if anybody has a comment or wants to raise anything, now is the time. Okay, so Bob Clark, please.
Just one other comment as we talk about this, and I know I'm stuck on this boathouse thing, but just a general comment. We've talked about raising docks, raising things, doing all these types of things. The current building code, and David, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think a single-story boathouse has the ability to be 16 feet tall, maximum height. A two-story boathouse is 25 feet tall, no restriction on the cupola. You could do whatever you want with the cupola. Again, people tend to keep that in proportion. I hear a lot of issues around design. You know, if you do a contemporary design, you end up with 25 feet quite generous. If you do a traditional design, 25 feet isn't. And in fact, people are buying these ski boats with the big biminis and things on the top, and they actually don't fit in boathouses anymore. We can't pull them in and lift them out of the water. So again, I know all of these things are very integrated and they cross, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. Just saying, when we talk about raising docks, we exacerbate other problems as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that's been noted. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Yes, Madam Chair, just briefly, I just want to confirm there will be time once we finish the 26 points to raise additional issues. Is that my understanding correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. Just a comment under section 2, when we spoke about recreational carrying capacity, we kind of skipped over, I think, a little bit, reduced permissions for docks on commercial properties, and then reduced waterfront amenity area permissions, private lots. I guess I'm not fully sure I understand that. And I'm just concerned. We have every marina out there saying we need more docks to facilitate people. And, you know, as we could use more docks, we're building more docks in Port Carling right now on the Lake Muskoka side. We're talking about adding more docks in Bala. All of these commercial properties we need to add docks to because people are moving around by boat. So I'm concerned about what we may be asking for in a policy in this particular case. And I think we're trying to control some of the commercial properties that are now residential with the number of boats that are there. And is it people from the lake accessing the property and I need a dock for that? Or is it people from the land who have cottages accessing boat slips to get out on the water? The latter we don't need, the first we do need. So I'm worried about reducing dock permissions. Our commercial dock is not extensive. We only go out, I think it's like 85 feet right now. So we're not as extensive as we should be, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mayor Harding. Noted. I believe Mr. Dyment wanted to make a comment.
Perhaps we need to explain that further. The intent wasn't to deal with docks that are servicing commercial uses, transient commercial uses. The intent there was for resorts and things that by limiting the size of the docks, it has an impact on limiting the amount of waterfront activity that occurs.
Okay, I think I understand that, and looks to me like Mayor Harding wants to make another comment. Do you?
Just want to be specific about that, and I understand that, you know, but if we took Cleveland's house as an example, as it was, you know, it's got a fair amount of shoreline coverage already, but not a lot of dock problem issues in that currently. Are we talking about taking that away or not taking that away? That's the only question, and I'm not sure how we delineate commercial properties versus resort properties versus privately owned resort properties to be able to access the water. So I just want to be very careful as we put in place those policies. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to guess that our consultants have that, and I'm sure Mr. Pink does, to be able to deal with that at this point. Anyone else? And if not, I don't see anyone else. So perhaps, Mr. Dyment, you could move on to protection of natural heritage features.
Yeah, so I'll be looking after that one, actually, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to make a general comment as well, and I probably could save this for later, but there's a fine line between writing policies in an official plan that are very specific and restrictive to not doing that. Some of the items we've discussed today, like, for example, 1-story versus 2-story boathouses, is probably more of a zoning bylaw discussion than an official plan discussion. And here's why. If we said, for example, that 1-story boathouses are the only type of boathouse permitted on the lakes in the official plan, that would mean if someone had a very nice looking boathouse down the road that made a lot of sense, that had a 2nd story, you'd have to amend the official plan for that to happen. That's probably not a good use of resources. So we should keep those things in mind when we are talking about specific development standards and restrictions on a property. Just a thought, outsider looking in on the discussions. And it's a general comment to amenity areas, for example. We could start specifying minimum amenity areas, but given the varied topography on everybody's lot around the lake, establishing a standard may not be the best idea in an official plan. Establishing a target is a great idea because targets can be applied and there's some discretion. Something to think about as we move forward. With that being said, the next topic is, and certainly anything I've said we can come back to for sure. The next topic deals with the protection of natural heritage features. And essentially, the policy direction indicates that we should be incorporating the policy framework in the district's plan, including the mapping within the township's official plan. The policy framework in the district's plan was significantly updated during the last OP review. It certainly includes all of the restrictions and prohibitions set out in the provincial policy statement, but does exceed that minimum standard by including all wetlands, not just provincially significant wetlands, in the category of no negative impact, in the category of the no negative impact test being applied. So for example, for a provincially significant wetland, there is a prohibition on development and site alteration. And if you're not a provincially significant wetland, but you're a wetland without it being significant, you have to demonstrate no negative impact. So the district's plan already goes beyond the minimum standard established by the provincial policy statement. What we're suggesting in this policy direction is that the township can even go further and identify other locally important features of interest and concern in the township. And a good example of that would be locally important woodlands, for example. The PPS does not require that significant woodlands be identified on the Canadian Shield, but certainly that doesn't prevent municipalities from identifying locally important woodlands in the community. So that would be an example of the township being able to identify local features as well. So the policy direction is pretty straightforward, and we're certainly looking for any comments on whether there are any other areas that the township should consider exceeding the minimum standards established by the district in its policy framework. And I think the policy direction as written opens the door for that moving forward. And we can certainly have further discussions on that through these meetings, but also when we get to writing policy going forward. I do note that we did go through the comments submitted by the Friends of Muskoka. There was a fairly lengthy report that went along with it. There are a number of items in there of interest that we'll certainly consider and discuss through the process. Some of them may go a little further than perhaps the township should be going at this point, but we'll get to those points as we go through the policy directions. But that's where I'll stop. Policy direction is pretty simple, and we're looking for some comments and feedback on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Mayor Harding?
Thank you for allowing me to chime in first. I understand the idea of this. You know, we designate heritage areas and say you can't do certain things, and they go through a policy and they get put on a list, and they get taken off the list, or they may get designated. I know recently, and those people, especially in Ward C, would probably be aware of a bunch of emails surrounding Queen's Face Rock. There's a church north of Manette and an old big rock face, and I think somebody owns the property and decided to put a boathouse on their property. And everybody, how do we protect this? How do we get, save that? And I guess I'm not sure, though, from a direction, who says this is significant to the rest of the world. I already own this property, I just haven't decided to develop it. And I do know that regularly everybody loves looking at the rocks and the trees across from their property because nobody's ever developed there. But all of a sudden somebody decides to buy the lot and develop it, and everybody's up in arms because I'm no longer looking at trees. So I'm just not sure how we impose that on certain people's properties at this particular point. And what the heritage committee, like we could designate it a heritage feature, or is it a natural heritage registry? I don't know, but just policy, I think we may catch a bunch of people off guard in this, and I'm just not sure how to implement it.
That's a very good point, and I'm almost thinking that what you're suggesting has much more to do with character than it does with natural heritage, because the character of the lakes is made up of rocks and trees in addition to the built environment. So that might be more of a discussion related to how the character of the lakes are protected. There are already extensive policies in the township's official plan on character. And I know that David, through his planning processes, would be considering those elements in any site plan application. But again, we also have to consider that not everything goes through site plan approval, and that's always going to be a challenge. I don't know, David, if you had a comment on the character angle to add to this.
David?
Not much further to add. I think you addressed the points I was going to raise, as it's more of a character than a natural heritage feature that the mayor is raising. I'd say that I guess it's a question of how localized do we get in identifying those significant features. And you're right, currently boathouses are not subject to control in our township. So likely what happened, property owner was entitled to a building permit, complied with the zoning bylaw, and there would have been no ability to prevent that boathouse from being constructed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz?
Thank you. Actually, this is a follow-up to the mayor's point. I think
you need to unmute yourself, Frank.
I can hear him.
Yeah, I am unmuted. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Shall I proceed, Madam Chair? Okay. Actually, and now that you've mentioned that this may be a character rather than a natural heritage feature, but I'd like to like the group to give some consideration to designating as a natural heritage feature the significant rock formations that Muskoka is known for. And I'm not referring to unique ones, I'm referring to the way the rock formation and the trees are there. 30 years ago when I moved up here, people built significant cottages, but they built them into the landscape and were respective of it. what's happening now, those 30-year-old cottages are being torn down and the rock is being blasted into smithereens to make the terrain fit the designer's plan. And if that's allowed to continue, it's not just that, but even on the waterfront where cottages were way up high are now being blasted down to be right on the water. So I think we need to generally have some control or something there, because to blast, you don't even need a permit. So there has to be some way that if you want to significantly alter the terrain, you should have to go through some process. And it's not only for the building, but now it's the sports court and the swimming pool and the storage buildings. So I just think, and if it doesn't fit in here, I'm happy if you want to fit it in somewhere else. But I think that discussion maybe should take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jaglowitz. I was just going to ask the question, is this a policy direction? Is this, I mean, we're all very concerned about that and we know we are, but is this a policy direction for discussion at this point? And I guess I need either Mr. Dyment or Mr. McDonald to give us some guidance on that.
If I can speak to it, Madam Chair, two kind of separate but related issues are coming up here. I think that Mayor Harding is talking about what we would call a cultural landscape as opposed to a natural heritage feature. And of course, coming from Skeleton Lake, I can tell you that we have some fairly significant ones there. And they're all over Muskoka. And the official plan can identify these cultural landscapes, and they're protected through policy under the provincial policy statement. And there's also policies in the district plan to deal with the cultural landscapes like that. And it is a policy direction that we can advance. This section that Mr. McDonald was talking about really is natural heritage features dealing with wildlife and vegetation and other things of that nature. And what the policies are saying is we have the ability to get deeper into just where those things are in Muskoka Lakes and put them on a map and identify them and protect them. And one example I'll give those listening is, I know where there's a heronry between Highway 169 and Stills Bay that nobody knows about, but it's a significant natural heritage feature and it should be protected and identified on a map. That's the sort of thing where we'd like to get deeper to provide that higher level of identification and protection.
A couple of things to follow up on what Jim was saying. I agree with what he's saying. The challenge with identifying something as a cultural heritage landscape is that it has to be done pursuant to the Ontario Heritage Act. And it's only when it becomes significant as defined through the PPS that you can actually protect it. So the burden of proof and study required to achieve that objective is quite significant in my experience. And the PPS was recently changed to make it even harder for folks to identify significant cultural heritage landscapes in the way you suggested, Jim. What I would suggest instead, and this would be to the Councillor Bridgman's question, a separate policy direction, is that the township consider identifying character areas that are made up of these examples of rock outcrops and establish special policies for them that then get considered on a case-by-case basis. The burden of proof in that kind of circumstance is less and easier to accomplish because it's locally driven. So that's my thought. We could revisit that. Certainly, if there's interest in that, we can add a policy direction to that effect to the list.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to see if we have an agreement to add that policy direction to our list now? I'm not sure how you want to do this from that standpoint. Maybe I'll just let everybody speak. So,
nodding heads. A few of those.
Sorry?
I see a few nodding heads. That might be all we need.
Well, I'd be surprised if we didn't say that, to be honest with you, but I've been surprised before. Patricia?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, certainly. And I think we already have our scenic corridors that we've identified and have some control over. So I think there's a beginning there for that type of thing. I'm looking back at the natural heritage mapping, which district acknowledges in its OP is not complete. And we know it's not complete. We've just had a not significant, but significant to some people, wetland filled in because it wasn't identified. I guess my question is, how do we frame a policy that encourages further identification of it? The mapping is horrendously expensive, as we know, but it's needed. It's the first step, and you'll all be aware of my connection with the integrated watershed management. It's the first step in characterization of a watershed is to do a natural heritage mapping, a thorough mapping. There might be an option to partner with district, maybe even with the province, in order to investigate this. But I think at this level, it would just be to put into the OP a policy to encourage further investigation of our natural heritage features, more deer wintering areas that have been missed, possibly. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Mr. Dyment comment because it may be directly to what Patricia just said.
Yeah, I agree. That's what the policy essentially says is as we identify these local, we can identify these locally significant areas and we should show them on the maps. We can add a policy and say that the maps will be updated on a regular basis when additional information is found. And I think that that's the right thing to do.
Okay, sounds good. Councillor Kelly.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you. I just want to make a couple of comments, and if there's a better place to do it, I'll shut up and we can talk about it later. But a few things that I'm hearing make me wonder if we're really all coming at this OP review from the same perspective. And I know we're not, but I don't know if we're coming at it with the same set of goals. I've heard more than once a certain pride in the escalating property values and how we measure success against increased property values. I don't think that's an honorable goal or an honorable intention. I think that's maybe an indirect side effect or benefit from some of the work that we're going to do, but that shouldn't be anywhere close to the goal. I'm hearing a lot of discussion about things that I would consider to be working on the environment or working through the environment. I think certainly my goal here is to find a way to work with the environment, whether it's the natural environment, the cultural environment, the historical environment. Human nature wants to reorder and resize and modify and change things to suit their needs. I think we have to put nature ahead of the human nature here. The last thing that I want to say is, depending on where our council comes out, on all of this, and certainly on the working committee where it comes out, we can actually find a way to protect just about anything that we collectively think is important if we have enough willpower to go after it. And I can tell you, and I realize it's outside of the jurisdiction of Ontario and even of Canada, you don't have to look very far. For instance, and I've raised this before, and it's not my pet project, it's a certain ideal life of mine or goal of mine, and that is Nantucket. I mean, there is an incredible amount of work around preserving and protecting the built environment, the cultural environment, the natural environment. And I'm sure there were obstacles in creating their official plan or their code of conduct. I'm sure it was a challenge that a lot of people said, this can't ever happen, we'll never get this done. But if enough people want it, and if they want it badly enough, we can achieve that if that becomes the goal that we set for ourselves. I think I'm a little bit concerned that we're not all working for the same set of priorities. And in the absence of a common set of priorities or a common set of goals, we're never going to achieve anything because we're not all working, we're sort of working at cross purposes. If you want me to say that later, I will.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Liz? Ms. Mundell?
Thank you. I wholeheartedly endorse what Councillor Kelly just said. And I'm just asking at this point, we have policies in our existing OP that protect character, built-in cultural heritage resources. There were references to architectural considerations and archaeological resources. And I just want to make sure that we're not discarding those when we write the new policy, that those policies that we worked hard to include in our current official plan will get carried over, because they do give us many tools to protect character, to protect cultural heritage landscapes.
In answer to that question, quickly, our goal through this process is to retain whatever works well already in the township and only fix what doesn't work well or enhance it. With the existing policies, we will be refining them to reflect more current terminology. I think where we may be going beyond is looking at character areas on the waterfront as opposed to just in the scenic areas or scenic corridors and within the urban centers. So that might be a bit of an add-on. But no, it's not our intent to discard policies that work well and everyone believes they work well.
Thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you. Let me just, if I can circle back to Councillor Kelly's comments, because I know he's my comment about property values. The goal of this OP is not to increase property values. But if the results of this OP amendment decrease property values, we have an issue. And I park that as a side, and I will always respect why it is people are here in Muskoka. And we talk about it. That's why we were all elected to council, why it is we want to buy property in Muskoka Lakes, why we want to call this home. That we have to maintain. And if we put in place policies the same way as if we do overdevelopment on the lakes through massive resorts, we are changing the landscape. It will devalue our properties, and every single person who chimed in on the environment, if the environment drops and everything else, we devalue our brand. And all I'm saying is we need to make sure we understand our brand, and changes in this policy would only enhance our brand. If it's going to take away from our brand, then it's not an appropriate policy. And that's my comment about value. It's not about an individual person and I can add value and I can add value. It's the totality of all of Muskoka.
Thank you, Mayor Harding. As interesting as this discussion is, I'm going to try and take us back on course again. And it's a valid discussion, Councillor Kelly, but I think we want to stay just where we are.
Don't I get a rebuttal? Don't I at least get a rebuttal?
Oh, sure you do. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. My point is simply this. I personally hope that the property values don't go up and they stop going up, and they may be even reversed, because I own a little piece of land with a lovely view over Lake Joseph that I hope someday my kids will own, and there's not much chance of them inheriting it and managing to keep it in the family if it's worth billions of bucks. You talk about our brand. We're not a public company. We're not trying to sell stock. The place is pretty well full to the point where we're trying to figure out how to limit further development, because we don't want it to get a lot bigger. People who buy it and invest in it and speculate in it, I suppose their interest is in seeing it increase in value. But people who put roots down here, who may be second, third, fourth generation, who really do value the nature, the rock and the trees, I'm not really sure they give a moment's thought to whether it's worth more today than it was yesterday. That's it.
Okay, that's where, and by the way, I'm going to guess Nantucket has unbelievable real estate values. So
weirdly enough, in spite of all the restrictions, you can't even hiccup in Nantucket without a license, and it's among the most expensive recreational property in the world. So yes.
Yes, it is. It is. So anyway, that no more. I'm going to Councillor Roberts. We're going back only to this discussion. That was entertaining, but not relevant at this point in time. So, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You can hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay, good, good. Okay, so we're talking about the protection of natural heritage features. I've been led to believe that our heritage committee that we have in place is doing much of this work and conversation, and the new OP should identify the official role of our heritage committee. I'll repeat again that like within this area, we believe we talk about environmental assessments, and we need to really not just refer to the MOP, but we need to include details in our official plan that provide scope in terms of reference and clear defined objectives. We need to incorporate in the MOP policies that capture or protect the features that we value in Muskoka. We've been talking about it, and I just want to make sure that trees get on the list, and wetlands, as was mentioned earlier, and large forest blocks. And just picking up on what Councillor Jagwitz was saying, we believe that we need a policy. We need approval of a building blasting envelope or blasting plan. So we should have policies that require approval of a building blasting plan, as well as policies that restrict blasting to the area within the building envelope and severe penalties for violating. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Well, perhaps there's a way through our official plan policy to incorporate some of that natural landscape that doesn't get blasted. I know it really doesn't fall under the official plan, it's more bylaws, but maybe you can, I'll leave that with you. Anyway, all right, we have one more comment, and we're very close to 1 o'clock right now. So Bob Clark.
Just quickly, a lot of what Councillor Roberts just mentioned, I think item 6 is watershed planning. And I think we keep coming around to the concerns of what's happening with hardscaping, tree removal, blasting. There's a whole pile of things that I think, I don't know, my opinion is, and maybe the only one, but we could put a lot of that under watershed planning. Now that, that's on site development. I know that's a far bigger topic, but as far as it relates to site development, I think a lot of our concerns about people destroying a hunk of dirt could be really dealt with David and Ryan. And again, my experience is they work very hard to protect the natural landscape that we have, in Muskoka, and they've done a very good job of it, at least in all of my dealings with them.
Okay, thank you. But yes, I believe that's more in another area than the official plan, but thank you for your comments. So I have no one else here that I can see, and so I'm going to turn to either Mr. Dyment or Mr. McDonald to ask you if you are good with that part. Oh, I see, Mr. Dyment.
I just wanted to mention one thing. We've talked a lot about what we call site alteration, and tomorrow we should talk about point number 17.
Okay, we'll make sure that we get that in tomorrow then. Thank you. So it looks, oh, Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, so I was just going to basically say the same thing as Jim is saying, and there will be a good opportunity tomorrow to talk about site development. And I can tell you that if an application to do anything on a property has to go through a Planning Act process and through David's office, every effort is made to minimize the impact of whatever is happening on that landscape. So there are already processes in place to deal with that. And I think what we're talking about is maybe codifying that a little bit more in the official plan and providing some greater direction on it. But I look forward to that conversation tomorrow. Chairman, this has been very good for us. We only made it through 4, but these were 4 very significant items. I'm hopeful we can finish the rest tomorrow. But if we don't, the last part of the discussion tomorrow will be how we finish the rest off and whether we need additional time. So we'll wait for that to happen. But thank you very much all for your comments today.
No, thank you. Thank you both and everybody else. It has been a good discussion today, and we're going to meet again tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to carry on. So that's great. And I believe that I now just simply need the motion to adjourn, Madam Clerk.
Yeah, we put the rules.
Do I?
No resolution for that.
Oh, okay. So our regular rules are back in order at this point. And thank everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. And I have a motion now by Councillor Jaglowitz, seconded by Councillor Nishikawa. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 2.3.2 of the Township's procedure, well, that's the other one. Okay, I'll be better at this tomorrow, I promise. Moved by Councillor Kelly, seconded by Mayor Harding. Be it resolved that the Special Planning Committee adjourn at 1:02 p.m. So everybody have a good rest of the day. Pardon me? Oh, all those in favor. See, I promise. Okay, if we do, we are. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.